At my brother's wedding, I accidentally heard his wife tell her friend his brother is the real heir, but nobody knows. I kept the secret. But a year later, the truth emerged in the most unexpected way. I never thought I'd be writing something like this. I'm not usually the type to make waves or draw attention to myself. My brother Randy has always been the golden child, confident, successful, popular, while I've been, well, I guess I'm just Ford, the quiet one who doesn't rock the boat. Randy's wedding to Naomi 3 months ago was exactly what you'd expect. Lavish, perfect, and completely intimidating for someone like me who hates being in crowds. I spent most of the reception nursing the same glass of champagne in a corner, watching everyone else have fun. That's kind of my specialty, I suppose, watching from the sidelines. I was heading to the bathroom when I heard it. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, honestly. The bathroom was down this little hallway past the bridal suite, and the door was cracked open just enough that voices carried. I recognized Naomi's voice immediately, along with her friend Julia's distinctive laugh. I was about to hurry past when I heard my name. Ford is the real heir, but nobody knows. I froze. Maybe I misheard? I probably should have just walked away. That's what I usually do when confronted with anything uncomfortable. But something kept me rooted to that spot, straining to hear more. The conversation shifted to something about timing and paperwork and things that didn't make sense. Julia asked something about Randy finding out, and Naomi just laughed in a way that made my skin crawl. Then they started moving toward the door, and I panicked, rushing to the bathroom before they could see me. I spent the rest of the reception feeling sick to my stomach, watching Naomi with new eyes. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I was being paranoid. These are the things I tell myself constantly, second-guessing every thought and feeling. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. The weeks after the wedding were normal, I guess. Randy and Naomi went on their honeymoon to some island I could never afford to visit. I returned to my modest apartment and my unremarkable life. But those words kept echoing in my head. Ford is the real heir. What did that even mean? Heir to what? Our family is comfortable, but not exactly royalty. When they returned, I noticed something odd. Naomi suddenly had all these questions about our family history. She'd corner our parents at Sunday dinners, asking about Grandpa's old business, about property lines on the family lake house, about old investments. I probably wouldn't have noticed if I hadn't been watching her so closely. Randy, for his part, seemed completely besotted. He's always been confident to the point of arrogance, but around Naomi, he was like a puppy, seeking approval. It was unsettling to see my brother so malleable. But who was I to judge? My last relationship ended when she got tired of my indecision and constant need for reassurance. Maybe Randy's approach was better. About a month after the wedding, Mom mentioned that Naomi had been asking for access to some old family documents for a heritage project she claimed to be working on. Something about preserving family history for future generations. Mom thought it was sweet. I felt that same uneasiness in my stomach. I should have said something then. I should have mentioned what I'd heard. But that's the thing about being the family doormat. Nobody really takes you seriously anyway. Besides, what would I even say? Was eavesdropping on your wife and I think she might be up to something? Randy would have laughed in my face or worse. So I did what I always do. Nothing. Well, not exactly nothing. I started paying more attention to family gatherings. I noticed how Naomi would steer conversations toward family finances, how she'd volunteer to help Dad organize his home office, how she seemed especially interested in the safe in my parents' study. 2 months after the wedding, Randy started becoming distant from the family. First, it was missing Sunday dinner because they were busy. Then it was canceling plans last minute. Before long, we were lucky to see them once every few weeks. When I tried to reach out to Randy, his responses were short, distracted. He mentioned they were reorganizing priorities and focusing on their future. I've never been the confrontational type, so I let it slide. I mentioned it to Mom once, and she brushed it off as newlywed behavior. Maybe that's all it was. Maybe I was seeing problems where none existed because of one overheard conversation I probably misunderstood anyway. Then came Dad's birthday celebration. We finally managed to get Randy and Naomi to commit to attending. Naomi seemed different, more confident, almost smug. She spent an unusual amount of time chatting with Dad about his retirement plans and investment portfolio. I might not be assertive, but I've always been observant. She was fishing for information, and Dad, always proud of his financial acumen, was happily providing it. At one point, I went to Dad's office to get some photos he wanted to show everyone. The door to the adjoining room, where the family safe is kept, was slightly ajar. I heard rustling. When I peeked in, I saw Naomi quickly putting something in her purse. She claimed she was looking for the bathroom, which made no sense since she'd been to the house dozens of times and knew exactly where it was. I nodded and apologized for disturbing her, like I always do. After they left, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. For once in my life, I decided to check rather than just worry. I waited until everyone was asleep and went to the safe. Dad's combination has been the same for years. All our birthdays in sequence. Inside, everything looked normal at first glance, but then I noticed some documents were slightly out of order. The folder containing information about Grandpa's business and the original family trust was thinner than it should have been. I know because I'm the family historian by default. While Randy was out winning trophies and making connections, I was the one who took an interest in where we came from. I know those documents better than anyone, and some were definitely missing. Still, I told myself I could be mistaken. Maybe Dad had removed them for some reason. I almost convinced myself to forget about it until last week, when I got an alert from the family's shared cloud storage. Someone had accessed and downloaded all the financial documents. The login came from an unfamiliar device, but the account used was Randy's. That might not have alarmed me if Randy had ever shown the slightest interest in family finances before. He's always been happy to let Dad and the family advisors handle everything. Randy cared about his career and his social life, not investment portfolios and trust documents. Yesterday, I finally worked up the courage to check on something that had been nagging at me. Our grandfather established a family trust years ago, with specific conditions about inheritance and succession. I'd never paid much attention to the details. That kind of thing always seemed far in the future. And honestly, I've always assumed Randy would be in charge of everything eventually. I requested copies of the trust documents from the family attorney, claiming I wanted to understand my financial position better for some personal planning. What I found made my blood run cold. There's a clause about birth order and timing in relation to certain business transactions Grandpa made. The trust is worded in a way that technically makes me, not Randy, the primary beneficiary of the largest portion of the family assets. It's some obscure legal technicality about being born before or after certain business assets were acquired. No one ever mentioned this to me. I doubt my parents even realized the implications of the wording. Why would they? Everyone always assumed Randy would take over everything as the more capable brother. I certainly never questioned it, but Naomi somehow found out. The missing documents, the questions about family history, the sudden interest in financial matters, it all makes sense now. Ford is the real heir, but nobody knows. I'm sitting here in my apartment, staring at bank notifications showing unusual activity in the family accounts, large consultations with specialized attorneys, documents being sent for legal review, a new LLC being formed with my brother and Naomi as principals. For once in my life, I'm not second-guessing what I'm seeing. She's making a play for the family money, using my brother as her access point, and based on what I've found, she's already moved significant funds. I've spent my whole life being passive, letting others decide, staying quiet to keep the peace. I've watched Randy take center stage while I applauded from the shadows. I've swallowed my opinions and buried my potential because it was easier than asserting myself. But something is shifting inside me. This isn't just about me anymore. This is my family being systematically targeted by someone who married in with an agenda. I've started documenting everything, every missing document, every suspicious transaction, every inconsistency in Naomi's story. My hands shake as I compile it all, but I keep going. Tomorrow, I'm meeting with a private investigator to look into Naomi's background. It's the most assertive step I've ever taken, and my stomach is in knots just thinking about it. But I've found something in myself I didn't know existed. A line that cannot be crossed. A point where even I, the eternal doormat, have to take a stand. I don't know what I'll find. I don't know if anyone will believe me when I finally speak up. But for the first time in my life, that's not going to stop me from acting. The quiet brother is watching, and he's done keeping secrets. Update. It's been 3 weeks since my last post, and I'm still struggling to process everything I've learned. First, I want to thank everyone who commented and messaged me. Your support gave me the courage to keep digging when every instinct told me to just curl up and hide. I've never been good at confrontation. I guess that's pretty obvious from my last post, but what I've discovered has changed something fundamental inside me. The private investigator I hired was worth every penny. I thought it would take weeks to find anything useful, but it only took 5 days before he called me for an urgent meeting. I remember sitting in that dingy coffee shop, hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my cup, as he laid out file after file of evidence. Naomi isn't who she claims to be, not even close. Her real name is Nevaeh Martin, and she's operated under at least 3 different identities in the last decade. She doesn't come from old money on the East Coast like she told everyone. She grew up in a trailer park and dropped out of community college after 1 semester. And this isn't her first marriage into a wealthy family. There were photos of her with different hair colors, different last names, always on the arm of some wealthy-looking man. The PI found 2 previous marriages that ended under suspicious circumstances, both to men from affluent families. In both cases, she walked away with substantial settlements after less than a year of marriage. The pattern was clear, but this time she's aiming higher, much higher. The most disturbing part? She's not working alone. Her friend Julia is actually her half-sister, and they've been running cons together for years. And that specialist lawyer she's been consulting? He's been involved in all her previous schemes. The PI found evidence suggesting they're more than just professional associates. After the initial shock wore off, I spent days combing through every document the PI had gathered. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I just kept reading the same information over and over, trying to make sense of how someone could be so calculating, so cold. And then I found it, the missing piece of the puzzle, the reason why she'd targeted our family specifically. 15 years ago, my grandfather's company was involved in a disputed buyout of a smaller family business. The court case dragged on for years, but eventually, the other family lost everything. Their name? Martin. Nevaeh's father was the owner who lost everything in that buyout. This isn't just a con for her, it's revenge. The real heir comment makes perfect sense now. When my grandfather restructured his assets after that buyout, he created a trust with an unusual provision. The primary beneficiary would be the first grandson born after the acquisition was finalized. Due to a paperwork delay, the official date of completion was recorded 3 weeks after the actual transaction. I was born during those 3 weeks. Randy was born 4 months later. By the strict letter of the legal document, I am technically the primary heir to about 70% of my family's wealth. The remaining 30% is split between Randy and my parents. No one ever told me this because it never mattered. Our family doesn't operate that way. We've always shared everything equally, and I never would have claimed that inheritance exclusively for myself. But Naomi, or Nevaeh, found this loophole. She must have been researching our family for years, waiting for the right moment. She chose Randy because he was the more visible brother, the one with the public profile that made him easy to target. And now she's planning to use this technicality to claim a massive portion of our family's assets through him. There's more. The PI confirmed what I had begun to suspect. Naomi isn't pregnant. She's been faking it to strengthen her position in the family and create an heir that would cement her claim to the family fortune. The ultrasound images she's been showing everyone were purchased online, generic images that could belong to anyone. I spent another week gathering more evidence, building a case so airtight that even Randy couldn't deny it. I documented every unauthorized access to family accounts. I tracked the formation of the new LLC that Naomi had created to funnel family assets. I even found emails between her and her lawyer discussing how to best exploit the trust loophole. When I felt I had enough, I asked Randy to meet me for lunch. Just the two of us, like old times. I was nervous, sure, but also strangely calm. For once in my life, I knew without a doubt that I was doing the right thing. The meeting was a disaster. I barely got through half my evidence before Randy exploded. He accused me of being jealous of his happiness, of making up lies because I couldn't stand to see him successful in both his career and personal life. When I tried to show him the documents about Naomi's real identity, he knocked them out of my hand, sending papers flying across the restaurant. He called me pathetic, said I'd always been jealous of him, said that everyone pitied me for being such a failure, for being so weak and indecisive that I couldn't even maintain a relationship. He said things I never imagined my brother could say to me, cutting straight to my deepest insecurities. I just sat there, taking it all, shrinking smaller and smaller with each word until I was almost nothing. When he finally stormed out, leaving me to gather the scattered evidence alone, I felt hollow, empty. I'd failed completely. That night was the lowest point of my life. I lay on my bathroom floor for hours, too numb even to cry. All those years of living in Randy's shadow, of being the reliable but unremarkable brother, of swallowing my opinions and shrinking myself to make room for everyone else, it all crashed down on me at once. I felt utterly worthless. And then, somewhere around 3 a.m., something shifted inside me. I got up from the floor, washed my face, and looked in the mirror. I didn't recognize the person staring back. There was a coldness in my eyes I'd never seen before, a clarity, a purpose. If no one would listen to the weak, hesitant Ford they'd always known, then perhaps it was time to become someone else, someone they couldn't ignore. The next morning I called in sick to work for the first time in 5 years. Instead, I went to see my parents' attorney, not to ask for help, but to gather information about our family's legal vulnerabilities. I needed to understand exactly what Naomi could and couldn't do. He was surprised by my questions, but answered them thoroughly. By the time I left his office, I understood that time was running out. Naomi had already laid the groundwork to petition for control of my portion of the trust, using Randy as her proxy. If she succeeded, she could liquidate assets and disappear before anyone realized what was happening. Over the next week, I created a new email address under a pseudonym and reached out to the families Naomi had conned before. I expected reluctance, maybe even hostility. Instead, they were eager to help. One man in particular, whose father had lost millions to Naomi 3 years ago, offered resources I never expected: financial support for my investigation, connections to specialized fraud investigators, even proof of her previous schemes that had never made it into official records. I learned that Naomi's lawyer, the one she's been secretly seeing, has helped her evade consequences before by settling cases quietly with confidentiality agreements. No criminal charges were ever filed because the victims were too embarrassed to go public. I won't make that mistake. I've spent the last 2 weeks building a case so thorough, so meticulously documented, that not even the best lawyer could poke holes in it. I've gathered witness statements from her previous victims. I've documented every unauthorized transaction. I've collected evidence of identity fraud, of the fake pregnancy, of the conspiracy between her, Julia, and the lawyer. Yesterday, I took the most drastic step yet. I introduced my friend Legend to Naomi at a charity event, presenting him as a financial advisor with access to offshore banking. It was the first time in my life I've ever deliberately deceived someone, and I was terrified she would see right through me. I'm not a good liar. I never have been. But she didn't notice my trembling hands or the sweat on my brow. She saw only what she wanted to see: another potential mark, another resource to exploit. Legend is meeting with her tomorrow to discuss investment opportunities that could help her move money quickly and quietly. He'll be wearing a recording device. My hands still shake when I think about it, but not from fear anymore, from anticipation. I've never been a vengeful person. I've spent my life avoiding conflict, making myself smaller to avoid rocking the boat. The few times I've been genuinely wronged, I convinced myself I deserved it somehow. That's just who I was. Not anymore. This woman targeted my family. She's manipulating my brother, exploiting his weaknesses and insecurities. She's planning to steal not just money, but our family's legacy. And when she's done, she'll discard Randy like garbage, leaving him broken while she moves on to her next victim. I won't let that happen. The old Ford would have given up after Randy rejected his help. The old Ford would have retreated into himself, accepted defeat, maybe even blamed himself for not being convincing enough. That Ford is gone. I've set up a meeting with my parents for next week. By then, I'll have everything I need. The recording from Legend, the complete financial trail, statements from her previous victims, proof of the fake pregnancy, everything. I won't give Randy another chance to dismiss me. I'll go straight to the top. And if that doesn't work, I've already contacted the authorities with an anonymous tip. They're just waiting for enough evidence to move forward with an investigation. One way or another, I'm going to stop her. I'm going to protect my family, even from themselves if necessary. I'm going to make sure she never targets another family again. I look at myself in the mirror now and barely recognize the person staring back. There's a hardness in my eyes that wasn't there before. A determination, a willingness to do whatever it takes. I never thought I was capable of this level of calculation, of cold, methodical planning. I never thought I could set aside my fear of confrontation long enough to fight back. But here I am, planning the complete and utter destruction of the woman who thought I was too weak to be a threat. The woman who dismissed me as the pathetic, forgettable brother. She's about to learn how wrong she was. Update 2. It's done. 3 simple words that don't begin to capture the seismic shift in my family over the past month. I've waited to post this update because I wanted to be absolutely certain about the outcome. No loose ends, no possible comebacks, no mercy. The meeting between Legend and Naomi, or Neve, as I now think of her, went better than I could have imagined. I was parked outside the upscale coffee shop where they met, listening through a small earpiece as my friend methodically extracted confession after confession. My palms were sweating so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel, but I forced myself to stay calm and listen. For someone who'd successfully conned multiple wealthy families, Neve was surprisingly careless when she thought she was in the presence of a co-conspirator. She detailed her entire scheme, how she'd researched our family for years, how she'd targeted Randy, specifically because of his ego and insecurities, how she planned to manipulate the trust loophole to gain control of the family assets. She even laughed about the fake pregnancy, explaining how easy it was to buy ultrasound images online and create a convincing timeline. But the most damning part came when Legend asked about her previous project. Without hesitation, she boasted about the other families she'd conned, providing names, amounts, and specific details that corroborated everything my investigator had found. She spoke about these people whose lives she'd damaged irreparably, with such casual disdain that something cold and hard settled in my chest. Any lingering doubt I might have had about destroying this woman vanished in that moment. Armed with the recording and my mounting pile of evidence, I scheduled the meeting with my parents. I'd been dreading this conversation for weeks, worried they wouldn't believe me or would somehow blame me for causing trouble. The old Ford would have been paralyzed by these fears. The new one simply prepared thoroughly and moved forward. I arrived at their house early on a Sunday morning, files organized, evidence categorized, points of discussion memorized. I'd even prepared answers for the inevitable questions and objections. As I rang the doorbell, I realized my hands weren't shaking anymore. My parents listened in stunned silence as I methodically laid out the evidence. The fake identity, the previous cons, the targeted revenge against our family for my grandfather's business dealings, the fraudulent pregnancy, the plan to exploit the trust loophole, the recordings of Navia detailing her scheme. Mom cried. Dad went very quiet, the way he always does when he's truly angry. They asked questions, examined documents, requested clarification, but they never once doubted me, never once suggested I might be making this up out of jealousy or spite. For perhaps the first time in my life they were listening to me, really listening. with the respect I'd always craved but never demanded. When I finished, Dad asked what I wanted to do next, not what he thought we should do or what he was going to do. What I wanted to do. It was such a small thing, but it nearly broke me. I swallowed hard and told them my plan. 3 days later, we held a family meeting. Randy was told only that it concerned important financial matters that couldn't be discussed over the phone. He arrived with Nevi, both of them clearly irritated at being summoned without explanation. The atmosphere in the room was tense as they entered. My parents sat stiffly on one couch, I occupied an armchair, and our family attorney waited by the desk with a stack of documents. Randy made some sarcastic comment about the formal setting as they sat down, but his smile faltered when no one laughed. For 2 solid hours, we presented our case. The attorney explained the legal implications of identity fraud, financial fraud, and conspiracy. My parents remained mostly silent, occasionally asking Nevi direct questions about her background that she struggled to answer consistently. I operated the laptop that displayed evidence on the large screen: bank records, identity documents, recordings, witness statements from her previous victims. Randy went through every stage of denial. First, he laughed it off as ridiculous. Then he became angry, accusing us of fabricating evidence out of jealousy. Next came bargaining. Surely there was some explanation, some misunderstanding. Finally, as the evidence mounted beyond any possibility of denial, he fell silent, his face ashen. Nevia's performance was almost impressive. She cried, she pleaded, she claimed misunderstandings and conspiracies against her. She tried to play on my parents' emotion, rubbing her supposedly pregnant belly and talking about the baby, their grandchild, who was innocent in all this. But we were prepared. I played the recording where she laughed about faking the pregnancy. Then I presented the medical records my investigator had obtained, showing she'd had a tubal ligation years ago. The look on her face when she realized we knew everything, absolutely everything, was something I'll never forget. It was the look of someone watching their carefully constructed world collapse around them. When she realized persuasion wouldn't work, she switched tactics: threats, accusations, promises to destroy our family name if we didn't back off. My parents remained impassive. The attorney continued taking notes, and I just watched, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction as she dug her hole deeper with every desperate word. Randy finally broke his silence to ask for time alone with her. We agreed, stepping out into the hallway. The conversation that followed was loud enough to hear through the door, Randy demanding explanations, Nevia's story changing with each question, accusations flying back and forth. When Randy emerged 20 minutes later, he looked 10 years older. He walked past us without a word and left the house. Nevia came out shortly after, composed but with hatred burning in her eyes. She told us this wasn't over, that we had no idea who we were dealing with. My mother, who had been remarkably restrained until that point, simply said that Nevi should expect to hear from her own attorney very soon, as well as the authorities in 3 different states. The next week unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance. The attorney filed for an emergency freeze on all family assets to prevent any last-minute transfers. Formal complaints were filed with authorities in every jurisdiction where Nevi had operated. Her previous victims were contacted and encouraged to come forward with their own statements. The documentation of her fraudulent activities was submitted to relevant agencies for investigation. Meanwhile, I focused on Randy. He was staying at a hotel, not responding to calls or messages from anyone. I knew what he was going through: the humiliation, the self-doubt, the painful re-examination of every moment of his relationship. So I wrote him a letter, not apologizing, I had nothing to apologize for, but acknowledging his pain and offering support when he was ready. 3 days later, he showed up at my apartment at 2 a.m., unshaven and bleary-eyed. He didn't apologize for the things he'd said to me during our lunch. He didn't thank me for uncovering the truth. He just asked if he could crash on my couch for a while. I made up the couch, gave him a blanket, and left him alone. Sometimes silence says more than words ever could. The legal process moved with surprising speed once all the evidence was presented. Nevaeh's previous victims came forward, emboldened by the knowledge they weren't alone. The attorney she'd been working with, and sleeping with, abandoned her case when presented with evidence of his own complicity. Julia, her half-sister and co-conspirator, disappeared as soon as the first legal documents were filed. Nevaeh found herself fighting battles on multiple fronts: the divorce proceedings Randy initiated, the fraud investigations in 3 different states, the civil suits from previous victims seeking restitution, the immigration investigation into her use of false identities. Without her usual resources or allies, she quickly became overwhelmed. 2 weeks ago, she reached out through an intermediary, offering a deal. She would relinquish all claims to family assets and sign whatever documents we wanted if we would drop the criminal complaints and allow her to leave the country quietly. My parents looked to me for the decision. The old Ford would have accepted the offer, grateful for a peaceful resolution that avoided further conflict. The new Ford didn't hesitate to reject it. Last Tuesday, Nevaeh was arrested at the airport, trying to flee the country with forged documents. She's currently in custody, awaiting trial on multiple felony charges. Her assets have been frozen, her reputation destroyed, her support network scattered. The woman who spent years meticulously building false identities and elaborate cons now doesn't even control her own name or daily schedule. As for Randy, he's slowly putting his life back together. The divorce is proceeding smoothly, with Nevaeh having no leverage to demand anything. He's moved in with me temporarily while looking for a new place. We're not talking much about what happened, but the other night over beers, he acknowledged that he should have listened to me from the beginning. Coming from Randy, that's practically a tearful apology. My parents have adjusted their estate planning to close the loophole Nevaeh tried to exploit, although I insisted they maintain the original trust structure. I don't want or need control over family assets that should be shared equally. That was never the point of any of this. The most surprising change has been in how my family treats me. There's a new respect in my father's eyes when he asks for my opinion on business matters. My mother no longer feels the need to manage my life or make excuses for me. And Randy, for perhaps the first time ever, treats me as an equal rather than his shadow. As for me, I barely recognize the person I was 3 months ago. That hesitant, self-doubting man who apologized for his existence seems like a stranger now. I still don't seek out confrontation, but I no longer fear it either. I've discovered a capacity for calculated action that I never knew I possessed. Some might expect me to feel guilty about Nevaeh's fate. I don't, not even slightly. She chose her path knowing the potential consequences. She targeted my family with cold, calculated malice. She would have left my brother emotionally and financially destroyed without a second thought. Every consequence she's facing now is the direct result of her own actions. Is that harsh? Maybe, but I've spent my entire life being the nice one, the forgiving one, the one who makes allowances for others while expecting none for myself. I've learned that sometimes justice requires a harder edge than kindness can provide. Yesterday, I received a letter from one of Nevaeh's previous victims. He thanked me for stopping her from destroying more lives, for having the courage to stand up when others had remained silent out of shame or fear. He said I'd given him back his sense of justice in the world. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Some actions speak for themselves. I don't know what comes next. Randy will eventually move out and rebuild his life. My parents will continue adjusting to this new family dynamic, and I'll keep exploring this unfamiliar territory of being respected rather than overlooked, of speaking up rather than staying silent. But one thing I know for certain, I will never again be the person who stands by watching while someone targets my family. I will never again doubt the evidence of my own eyes and ears because confrontation seems too difficult. I will never again make myself small to avoid rocking the boat. The real heir has finally claimed his birthright, not the money or the assets. Those are just things. The true inheritance was finding the strength I never knew I had. And unlike Nevaeh, that's something no one can ever take from me.